Devnexus 2021. I want to welcome you to my talk on making the jump to JUnit 5 from JUnit 4. Appreciate you coming in here. So let's go ahead and get started. A little bit about myself. My name is Jonathan Meek. I'm currently a software engineer at the Home Depot. I've been an active Java developer since 2010. The oldest version of Java I've ever worked on was actually 1.6. When I'm not coding, I'm currently in the process of training for my first half marathon, which will hopefully happen on March of this year. So I have two cats, Deacon and Rayna, Deacon being the black and white tuxedo that you see in the photo here, and then Rayna the brown tabby. This is my wonderful wife, Melonie. She is the most talented agile coach and baker known to me. There's a lot of shop talking that happens between the two of us, and she is usually coaching me to do better. So, can't say I'm losing out on anything. And as far as her baking skills, you'll see a sample of one of her treats that she makes. It's a peanut butter cup cookie, if memory serves me right. Anyways, I live a very blessed life, but enough about me. Let's actually talk about what we're here to talk about. So when it comes to our programming, the last thing we usually touch is the test frameworks. With that, right, we're willing to change our JDKs, we're willing to use the latest and greatest frameworks, but we have a hesitation with those test frameworks. We kind of have the attitude shown in the last panel there of we never touch the ancient code. And from my perspective, that's a problem, especially for those of us who are practitioners of test-driven development. Because at the end of the day, our tests are the things that give our code the life and the assurance that they work correctly. And to me, this is like letting one of your tools sit out to rust, right? It's not a good practice, so we have to sharpen the saw from time to time. So another problem kind of related with that is we're not talking about it. As I alluded to earlier, right? We talk about the JDK, we talk about the different frameworks. So what you see here is I pulled a track from a conference here for Java. And notice that we talk about all the other things, right? So I think as a community, we have to get better about finding ways to present and share the knowledge abroad. And for those who couldn't tell from the slide there, this was actually from last year's Devnexus. So that's kind of the idea is that, again, I think as a community, we have to work and figure it out together. All right. So first question, is it just a dependency swap out? No. JUnit 5 represents a major version shift and also reorganization effort by the JUnit team. So to help do better practices behind the development of the software. So it breaks it up into three places. The JUnit platform, so this is where the test engine API interfaces reside. The JUnit Jupyter, where the actual implementation for the test engine API resides. And then JUnit Vintage, where you're able to run JUnit 3 and 4 tests inside of JUnit 5. So you can see there that best practice. Also, JUnit 5 incorporates Java 8 lambdas in it as well. So if you're paying attention, you heard me say about JUnit Vintage. So next question, can you use it? You can, but my personal experience has been that it doesn't work as far as that goes. So I would say that as we move forward with new projects, go ahead and switch to JUnit 5. And for our older legacy projects, consider the idea of refactoring the tests that you have as you transition over into JUnit 5. Because you may have tests that are sitting out there that serve no purpose at this point. Also, depending on your tests themselves, it may honestly be a simple enough switch to do and whatnot. So evaluate for your scenario and everything. And I would say, as a whole, probably avoid using this because eventually that is going to be deprecated at some point in time. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the annotations around in JUnit 5. You'll notice that there's some naming changes for the annotations. I think this helps provide some clarity behind them. So you'll see here at the top, the at test remains the same. Now you'll see a little bit more clarity around the before class and before and after pieces, right? So before and after class is now before all, after all. Then the before is now before each, and then the after is after each. My favorite one here is the at ignore is now at disabled. To me, that's a little bit more concise. And then finally, the runs with moves to extends with. So with JUnit 5, they also moved to the idea of extensions, so that way you could batch a set of extensions together instead of being limited to the singular runner. All right. Next piece that has changed has been the packaging. So remember earlier I said that the project had been broken up into 3 places. Well, that means that it's been broken up into 3 packages now. So what you'll see is instead of org.junit.test, you'll see juniper.api.test. And same with the asserts. Those have migrated to juniper.api.assertions. So again, providing that conciseness and clarity behind it. So how exactly do we upgrade? Well, first thing is we've got to make sure we're running the minimum versions of Java and the Spring framework. So check that you're using Java 8 or higher, because like I said earlier, it's using the Java 8 lambdas in parts. And then Spring Framework 5 or higher. So the earliest version I could find that this would work with was 2.0.8.release. Now, with that version, you had to put an exclude dependency for the JUnit Vintage stuff in order for it to work strictly with JUnit 5 out of the box. But as of Spring Boot 2.4, JUnit 5 became default. So in the example I'm going to do in a bit, we're going to use Spring Boot 2.4 to avoid having to do the excludes dependency. Second thing is upgrade the dependencies in your POM XML or your build Gradle. And then you want to swap out the following bits. So the at1 width turns into an at extend width. Any Spring runner classes you have turn into Spring extensions class. And then the at before becomes an at before each. Then also if you happen to be using Mockito, it turns into a Mockito extension class. And also I point back to the little thing I just talked about with the package guidance of typically your implementations, if not all your implementations, reside in that org.junit.jupyter.api package area. All right. And the 2 cool features I'm going to show concerning JUnit 5 is the at display name. This allows you to add in a human readable name to the test. For me, this is valuable for developers that may not have as much experience in the code base as yourself or the people developing the code. It gives them something that when they run tests, they can easily see a failure and have a better sense of what has failed instead of trying to decipher one's method convention, right? I think we've all been there where we've all decided on the convention only to find that it really didn't work in the right cases. The second one is the at parameterized test and at CSV file source. So the at parameterized test actually allows you to set it up so that the test can be run multiple times with changing parameters being passed in. So instead of having to write 4 separate tests to test different parameters, you can write one test that will take in that those parameters. And the at CSV file source gives you a way to put that together inside of a CSV and parse out that piece. All right, so let's do some live coding. So key thought is the fact that I've already coded the JUnit 4 material, and I also have the JUnit 5 stuff there on hand in case something goes sideways. Because again, live demos don't always go as planned. So let me switch over to VS Code. All right, and to kind of prove the point, I'll go ahead and run, whoops, not in all caps and angry, but I'll go ahead and run clean test. So that way we can see everything working as expected. Whoop. And also helps if I spell the parameter correctly. All right. So while that is running, go ahead and close these things out real quick. We'll kind of walk through it. So for the example of this sample app, I made a simple REST controller that deals with coffee because coffee is one of my favorite things to drink. So if I go in here into the controller, we can see there are 3 endpoints. One that gets all the coffees in the database. One that is, I pass an ID and it gives me back that ID. And then the last one gives me, quote unquote, the best coffee or the coffee with the highest rated marker in it. If we look at the model real quick, we can see that I have a simple, let's see here, get it to stay still. Coffee ID, that's in the database, right? A coffee name, a coffee type, and a coffee rating. For the database, I'm using a simple H2 in-memory database to keep things easy. Right, and here with the data.sql being defined in the app, right, the H2 piece goes through, drops the table if it exists, adds the new table, inserts these new values. All right. So again, we're kind of waiting for the testing to happen through because we're doing the controller test as well as the service test. All right, so you can see here 5 controller tests and then 4 service tests. All right, so let's take a look here and we'll go ahead and start the edit process. So I'll go into my POM XML and we will go ahead and change this to 4.0. I know 2.4.1 is out already, but I haven't tested it, so I don't know what will break. All right, and if I start going into my tests, we'll go ahead and start seeing stuff going sideways. All right, so we'll start with the controller test. It's just starting philosophy. I always like starting with the outer item and working my way in. All right, so we'll start with the imports and then work our way down. All right, so this is going to be now Jupyter.api.assertions. All right, there it goes. Oh, also helps if I spell Jupyter correctly. All right, and then here we will do Jupyter.api.test. All right, and remember I said the runner changes. So here, instead of the API, I believe it's the dot extensions, but we'll let our system help us out a little bit. All right, there we go. I don't want to pull in all of those. I just want to pull in the extend with. All right, whoop, and it gave me an extra. Okay, cool. Something that may have not been clear at the beginning, you can actually still use the Hamcrest matchers for stuff in integration with JUnit 5. So just as a side little call out. All right, I'm going to change this run width to an extend width, and then I'm going to change the spring runner into an extension. All right, cool. And it also updated it for me up here, and I'm also just going to go ahead and remove that import. Okay, so let's scroll down. It looks like I still have one item that's a little bit angry at me, so let's go take a look. Oh, okay. It's the assertions, right? Because remember, it moved from assert to assertions. So I do assertions. All right. That test looks good at this point in time. I'm not going to run it just yet. I'm actually going to go ahead and do the coffee service test. So these are the service tests. Again, we'll start at the top here. JUnit Jupyter.api. Right. And before now becomes a before each. And then we will do a API.test. And then we'll get rid of the run with. And then we will correct the static import for the assertions. So Jupyter.api.assertions. And again, helps if I spell. But again, this is why I got into computers, is because of the fact I can't spell. Can't do math, can't spell. I don't know what they're going to do with me, to be honest. All right, so we will do an extend with here. And I know it's yelling at me right now because of the fact that I haven't done the import. And then we turn this into an extension. And then using the quick fix command, there we go. All right. So that looks correct. Let's see, what is it yelling about? Oh, the annotation is incorrect here, so this becomes a before each. All right, let's scroll down. Okay, so one of the key differences in JUnit 4 and JUnit 5 is no longer are you doing this expected component to the test. You're not able to do that in JUnit 5. So what you do instead is an assert throws. All right, so we'll just let it do that. So with the assert throws, and I'll let the system help me out here with the import, or it's choosing not to. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but that's okay. So we will soldier on. We basically give it the exception that we're expecting, and then what command are we calling in the process, right? And this is one of the few things that takes advantage of the Lambda support. So no such element exception dot class, and here's where I use my little Lambda, right? And I tell it, okay, do the coffee service dot get coffee by ID, and I give it 4L, and I close it out. Okay. I think it's yelling at me right now because of the fact that it doesn't know how to do the import. So we're going to scroll up and check to see if we have the import. Yeah, it's mad because I don't have that. So I'm just going to duplicate line 18 and change it out for assert throws. Assert throws, okay. And we're going to get rid of that import that we don't need. All right, so before we run everything, just going to do a quick sanity check, make sure I don't have anything that's yelling at me or is not used. All right, everything looks good. All right, cool. All looks great. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to run the tests, make sure we're good. Whoops, probably helps so I keep spelling that command correctly. And it's going to run through all the tests, and you'll notice with the controller test, we're actually testing it out using the mock MVC and the Spring Boot, so it's actually starting up the application and running those things in real time. So while this is running, thus far, all we've accomplished at this point is made just the simple changes, right? So the functionality right now mirrors exactly what's in JUnit 4 and JUnit 5. All right, and the tests are done. Now what I'm going to do is actually showcase some of the cool things in the JUnit 5. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at display name. So for example, right here, line 31, should return all coffees when hitting default resource with get. That's a mouthful. And also when you do the report on it, and I can actually pull it up over here. Oh, it's showing the coffee service test. Let me just hit rerun there real quick, and it'll pop it up for us. All right. In the meantime, while it's running that, we'll go ahead and do the display name. So we just do @display name. And I give it something that's useful. So returns all coffees, little hyphen, get / 200K. So what I've done is told it, okay, I expect it to return all my coffees. I expect it to be on the get using on the default endpoint. I expect a response back of 200, okay. All right. And with that being said, I will run the test here. Oh, it's complaining about the fact it's not imported, so let's just do that. Yep, import it for me. All right, and we're going to run this one test. All right, notice here that now my test report uses the display name. And again, this is the part that I think that was really critical for developers and especially for non-technical person, right? If your manager reviews over test coverages from time to time or looks at any of the reports, right, they're able to get something that helps them understand what the functionality is without having to try to decipher the developer's lingo here. So that's what I love about the @display name. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and jump over to the parameterized test and the CSV file resource. So I'll jump over here to the coffee service test. All right. And I'm going to pick on this one of should return single coffee by ID. Great. So instead of just testing the one case, I can actually write it out to be multiple cases. So the first thing I'm going to do is instead of @test, I'm going to put this as @parameterized test. If you have both of them together on the same line, you'll end up with too many an error basically stating that there are too many test descriptors. It took me the longest time to understand what that error meant when I was getting it at first. All right, so we'll do CSV file, source, right, and then you have to give it resources. Now, by default, it's going to look at if you don't give it a directory, it's going to look at test resources. So I'm planning to create a test data.csv, and I'll create that over here. So let me resolve the annotation not resolving. Okay, cool. All right, so now everything looks correct. So the next thing I'm going to do is come over here in my tests, create a new folder. Resources. Right. And then I am going to create a new file that is test data.csv. All right. So I'm going to cheat a little bit here because I have the test data already copied. So I'm just going to copy it over here real quick, and then I'll walk through what we did. All right. So in the CSV, we have the index. So this helps us with walking through the array, right? The ID, or the coffee ID, the coffee name, the coffee type, and then the coffee rating. So now what I'm going to do is update my method to actually have those values in it. So we will say int index, and then string coffee ID, string, actually we're going to use expected coffee ID. And then expected coffee name, and string expected coffee type, then a double of expected coffee rating. All right, so now we're going to go about the process of correcting things. So the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to take the expected coffee ID and turn that into a long. So that way we can replace it there for the find by ID or the get coffee by ID. So long coffee ID equals long dot parse long. There we go. And we will put expected coffee ID. All right, now the key part is I've got to correct it everywhere I have it. So where I have this 1L, I've got to change it out. So coffee ID. If I don't, Makito ends up yelling at me and going, hey, your test method only called this one thing. I found that out earlier today. All right, there we go. All right, cool. So that's now changed. Now we're going to swap out our index here. So instead of get 0, it's going to be get index. All right, and then we're going to change out our expected items. So instead of a hard-coded item, it will actually be expected coffee name, expected coffee type, and expected coffee rating. All right, there we go. So now we should be able to run the test, and what we will see here with this particular test, and if I run them all, so we're going to do that just to show the difference. We're going to see an expansion by 3 more tests instead of just the 1. So remember what I said earlier about it, of it's writing 1 test but being able to get 4 other tests out of the process, or however many you want. So let's do the run test. All right, looks like it's completed. And also probably the better way to actually show this off is actually running the full test suite, because you'll see the numbers expand from 9 to 11. So let me do that instead. I love my controller test, but sometimes it just feels like it takes forever. All right, so you can see here now where the coffee service test has 6 tests now. Right? Originally it was 4, so there was 2 additional, right? So you had checking for 1, checking for 2, checking for 3, right? And that expanded us to 11 tests instead of that. Another note, and something I won't go into in the demo, is that with the parameterized test, there is a way to have it pretty print, so that way when something fails, you get a clearer picture as to what has gone wrong or what inputs were passed in and everything. So, all right, well, that completes that part of the demo. So let's switch back over here to the slides, go back into it. So woohoo, we managed to get through the live coding without too much harm. All right, so here's some of the resources. These were resources I used in the process of putting together the PowerPoint and the presentation. So I borrowed heavily from these things. Again, just want to be transparent of I didn't come up with this on my own. I had help. And I wish to give a special thanks to my Tax Commons crew at the Home Depot. So thanks to my teammates who sat and listened to me ramble on about this stuff, ask questions, give me advice. Thank you. A special thanks to Jeff Anderson, who provided the most feedback. His notes were invaluable. And Jonathan Davis, who served as my AV guy and helped me get OBS set up and all those pieces. And finally, a very strong special thank you to Denore Bercier. He was served as my mentor when I started developing in Java. And actually, he was the first person to tell me about Devnexus over a decade ago. So to say that I wouldn't be on this stage without his help is, I think, a strong understatement. So I just wanted to make sure I acknowledge the people who've helped me along the way. With that said, thank you so much for attending the talk. I look forward to 2022 when we're all back together and able to see each other in person. And fingers crossed, I'll be back on the stage again. So thanks. Stay safe out there. See ya.